Rold announced in a loud voice that he had broken off his engagement to Silviana Melcarini, causing the girl to be surprised, while a crowd gradually gathered around and a figure with long dark hair watched from afar. The girl confidently stated that she humbly accepted this news, feeling that today the long-awaited freedom would finally become a reality, while the audience continued to discuss what was happening. Then Christopher froze, hearing Silviana herself confirm the severance of their alliance obligations, and she again calmly asserted that she accepted his decision with relief. Meanwhile, the dark-haired woman calmly assured her interlocutor that the loss of her status as the heir apparent did not deprive her of peace at all, since she had long hated the very thought of such a marriage and was even grateful that the union had been dissolved. Afterwards, the dark-haired woman demanded to know the reason for the breakup, noting that choosing the St. Edina Academy graduation ceremony as the venue for the announcement was too ostentatious, while the man suddenly lost his confidence. The woman, holding a fan, boldly challenged her opponent, hinting that if he had decided to make a public accusation, he was obliged to present serious evidence, while the other person showed doubt and uncertainty. Rold, in irritation, accused someone of bullying Katia, while Gilbert, stunned, tried to comprehend the situation, and Melva, confused, tried to keep him from bursting into rage. The girl tearfully admitted that Silviana had always hated her, while Rold understood that if they were being slandered, then he could only defend himself, even if the accusations were false. However, the dark-haired woman firmly noted that she did not remember anything like this, emphasizing that she had been preparing for this particular day for a long time, and her resolve had only strengthened. Rold flared up, accusing Eileen of tearing up someone's textbooks, but the woman calmly replied that she was too busy to bother with such nonsense and questioned why she would even need to do so. He, however, insisted that Katia was simply in her way. The man suggested that someone had pushed Katia down the steps a week ago, but the woman reminded him that a healer could recover on his own and that the bandages only created an image of a victim, misleading those around him. Gilbert denied the accusations, explaining that he had been absent from the academy a week earlier and therefore physically unable to attend. Then another man demanded to know where exactly he had been during his absence. After this, the confident girl proudly declared that she had been picking daikon radish in the dungeon that day. Her words made the blonde man and the girl standing next to her turn pale, while the others watched from the top of the stairs. Rold was surprised to learn that radishes could even grow underground, but Letitia explained that vegetables from such places were prized for their taste, nutrition, and use in alchemical crafts. Rold then pointed out that students were forbidden from entering the dungeons without mentors and from receiving licenses before completing their training, but the dark-haired woman confidently revealed that she was operating under a different name, and exceptions did exist. The confident woman introduced herself as Silvini, an S-rank adventurer, and with bright energy announced that she was pleased to meet him, emphasizing her professional affiliation. The woman decisively broke the staff, insisting she had no time to play the role of a petty villain. The man, perplexed, asked her rank, and she explained that adventurers always have records to back up their alibis. Gilbert then stated that they both agreed to dissolve the union, meaning everything was settled. Unable to bear the atmosphere of the graduation ceremony, he hurried up the stairs and left the hall. The girl began to thank him, but almost immediately abandoned this thought and only said goodbye to Prince Christopher, smoothly descending the shining staircase, surrounded by sparkling light. At that moment, a magical transference circle flared before everyone's eyes, and someone's silhouette vanished. One man clenched his fist, shouting the woman's name, while another knelt next to Christopher, trying to make sense of what had happened. A joyful girl announced the official end of the engagement ceremony, while another figure reflected on the 18 years spent in the Melcarini house and the decade since the imposed union, feeling tired of the endless social duties. After this, Melva spoke harshly of her contempt for Christopher, condemning his disgusting attitude towards his fiancée, while the narrative recalled his unhealthy attachment to Katia, who remained at the academy even 2 years after graduation. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the Love Dungeon game world, where various characters stood nearby, and Silviana Melcarini calmly imagined herself as a villain whose purpose in this universe had long been determined. The narrative then described Love Dungeon as a strange mix of dungeon RPG and high school romance simulator, known for its absurd concept and unclear audience. In this version, Silviana mercilessly persecuted Katia, whose execution opened one of the storylines, and even became the final opponent, although, in the narrator's opinion, such a path should have been avoided. On her 8th birthday, the girl realized she had been transformed into a villain and quickly came to terms with it, while those around her worried about her. She, however, decided to escape the fateful execution scenario at any cost and live a peaceful life. After that, she focused on constant training, strengthening her body and skills as a potential final boss, while her parents, overly cautious, immersed themselves in her preparation, building a respectable reputation for the ducal house despite its sinister lineage. Meanwhile, at the academy, she tried to remain inconspicuous and act as kindly as possible so as not to create conflict with the main character, while secretly starting a career as an adventurer, striving to build her own dream. The girl then joyfully celebrated the dissolved union, feeling a sense of victory. Now she had her own house and farm, bought with honestly earned money, and finally had the opportunity to live as Sylviana Rini, and not as the future wife of the heir. Then she remembered her longtime dream of opening a cozy retro cafe with her sister, but then she thought about the past, where she was a weak-willed workaholic who didn't know how to ask for help and died due to overwork or an accident in a cruel company. After such thoughts, the girl firmly decided that in her second life she would follow her own path and never allow herself to become the final enemy, determining her fate according to her own rules. Meanwhile, the dark-haired figure proclaimed that from now on she would live for herself, and two small magical creatures floated nearby, a fiery spirit and an ethereal figure with light hair and an airy dress. Then a woman appeared in the room, cheerfully apologizing for the intrusion and explaining that she had used a teleportation circle. Sylvie was stunned to recognize the intruder as her own mother. The girl's mother informed her that the royal family was calling her, despite the completed annulment of the union, and she reluctantly agreed to go, understanding the inevitability. Afterwards, Sylviana, elegantly dressed, thanked her parents for their preparations, and they, admiring her appearance, compared the dress to camping gear, while the girl herself realized how unexpectedly quickly she had been returned home. Meanwhile, she reminded herself that the game's plot always moved this way, and the blonde man insisted that publicly breaking up the union was an unforgivable act, mentioning Christopher. Gilbert then reminded her of the farm he'd bought and admitted he'd miss her, asking if she was ready to negotiate with the crown. Sylviana, however, noted that thanks to the teleportation circles, the visit would take only moments. The girl confidently stated that she had thought through options for any position, hers or the prince's, while simultaneously touching the box hidden under a protective lock. The action then moved to an empty throne room, where a maid announced the arrival of Sylviana Melcarini, hinting that the dispute would soon be resolved. Sylviana noted with gentle confidence that she had expected the usual signing of the termination papers and had even been happy about it, but the man firmly stated that he did not intend to reverse the annulment, regardless of her apologies. At this point, Gilbert strained to get a word in, but then asked his brother to calm down while a woman named Sylviana Melcarini watched their argument with a concentrated expression. Edgar sharply urged one participant in the conversation to choose his words and to be respectful of the royal family, while the person observing him remembered him as Christopher's younger brother, once strictly brought up, but now unexpectedly showing firmness and toughness. After this, he noticed a heavy look on himself and noted to himself that in such a situation, he himself was probably perceived as an adversary, since he had intervened in the dispute too categorically. Meanwhile, the narrative introduced the second prince, Edgar Birnam, the same age as the narrator and 2 years younger than Christopher's brother, although the girl admitted that she knew considerably less about him than his rank would suggest. Then Gilbert remembered the chaos that had ensued after the graduation ceremony and wondered why Christopher, who had long since left the academy, had approached Katia, while the heroine herself, due to her engagement, had avoided any contact with young men. After this, the fair-haired man emphasized that his brother's behavior was not at all commendable and that he should have acted more calmly, while the dark-haired girl noted that she had only tried to keep the situation under control and had not intended to reveal her status as an adventurer. Meanwhile, the man calmly demanded that she stop making excuses, but she sensed something strange in his irascibility, suspecting that the cause of his irritation was not only resentment for his brother, but something else, as yet elusive. Roald then demanded silence, assuring the public that all the evidence against Sylviana had been collected, while the king tried to calm the tension, reminding them that it was still unclear who was right, and that breaking off the engagement could not happen so frivolously. After this, the girl dismissed the broken objects, considering such evidence unfounded, while one of the men claimed that Katia had complained of an attack and had allegedly been injured, but the other participant disputed this, stating that he had been in the dungeon that day. Meanwhile, Gilbert demanded proof, calling the story ridiculous and ridiculing the idea of a mysterious S-rank adventurer, while the tiny entity in the corner expressed dissatisfaction with his persistence. Then the girl agreed to show everything necessary and opened a box filled with time crystals, explaining that these magical media serve as analogs of game saves and are incredibly expensive. After that, she told how a year ago, Katya, being a simple city dweller, came to the entrance ceremony, unexpectedly awakened healing magic and was transferred to the St. Aidan Academy, and one of the young men claimed that he saved her after she fell into the pond. The girl then clarified that she had attended the ceremony that day as a representative of the new recruitment and immediately headed to the dungeon, without even passing by the pond, which amazed the listener. Afterwards, Rold reminded her that Katya had been studying, practicing magic, and meticulously preparing her vocals for the school festival, and someone had torn up her sheet music. Gilbert explained that he was overwhelmed with the festival preparations and committee duties. Meanwhile, he mentioned the Queen's instructions at the New Year's ceremony and reading evening, adding that there was even a day of heavy snowfall recorded and preserved in the records. Rold then angrily demanded an explanation for the contradictions in Katya's story, but Letitia calmly declared that Christopher had been deceived by Lady Katya, which left him deeply confused. Afterwards, Gilbert asked the girl whether the use of such expensive time crystals was justified and whether it was really necessary to document every step. Meanwhile, Rold suggested that someone had anticipated trouble, and Letitia mentally noted his insight. He then explained that he had acted out of self-defense, fearing that any mistake at the academy could cast a shadow on the royal family. Then the girl confidently stated that she had recorded all her actions to rule out any attempts at setup or false accusations of bullying, convinced that she had completely proven her case, and her interlocutor was amazed by her foresight. After this, the two young men, drenched in a cold sweat, realized that they had to properly repay the support given to them with kindness and were already making plans for a return gesture. Then one woman resolutely declared that she remained the same noble villain and did not intend to tolerate unfair accusations, but a voice from the outside reminded her that every sound in the room was stored in a time crystal, asking her to think about her own behavior. The young man at the desk insisted that he was not shifting responsibility, although he immediately admitted that everything had happened precisely because of another participant, who immediately asked if he was blaming others again. Gilbert then sharply reproached his opponent for the loss of royal dignity and gullibility in the face of a woman, while she herself smiled with unshakable confidence, noting that such a shameful episode would remain in the history of the palace forever. After this, Gilbert accused Silviana Melcarini of being too bold, but she boldly asked whether she was obliged to show respect to the one who had destroyed their union, while Rold stood silently behind, and the other man leaned on the edge of the table. Meanwhile, the girl passionately declared that raising a hand to another woman while engaged was the height of bad taste, emphasizing her contempt with an expressive gesture. Then the king solemnly declared the break in the engagement official, and the young man next to him involuntarily shuddered, while the woman firmly noted that she would not forgive the insult to her daughter, calling the future king a shameful example. After this, Rold declared that this was all over, expressing confidence, and others noted that the formidable parent of that very noble villain had intervened in the matter, emphasizing that now it was especially necessary to choose a side carefully, because a truly peaceful life was beginning. Then one of the women demanded compensation from the royal family for the broken engagement, but the man furiously rejected her claim and immediately launched a flaming attack. Meanwhile, in the majestic hall, a young man suddenly formed a massive fireball, surprising the man who called him brother, while the figure in the dress watched the magic in admiration, suggesting that he had been training seriously after all. Letitia remembered Rold's harsh words and wondered if he truly hated her, but when he launched his attack, she decided not to pay any more attention to his caustic remarks. Then the girl calmly suggested throwing away the unnecessary things, and the man next to her asked in shock how she had managed to catch the fireball, marveling at her dexterity. After that, the dark-haired girl released a water spear, then realized how close she was to death, while a figure sat nearby, surrounded by space melting after the magic. Meanwhile, the young man urgently turned to the king, who silently watched the scene, while a smiling man advised the monarch to learn from the merciful daughter who had deliberately missed, and a woman nearby added that Sylvie could incinerate the enemy instantly. The confident woman then asked for more compensation, sincerely expecting her demand to be met, and the man in uniform was amazed at such boldness, while the crown ruler reluctantly agreed. Afterwards, the girl drank tea with pleasure and happily noted that she was finally starting to live the measured life of her dreams. Then she had a leisurely breakfast in the cozy kitchen, imagining the peaceful suburbs with the morning chirping of birds. Meanwhile, she admitted to herself that her slow existence had turned out to be unexpectedly busy, and while thinking about her future plans, she heard a knock on the door, wondering who could have come so early. Then Gilbert opened the door, and, entering, heard from one of the girls that the house was empty and there was nothing to worry about. However, she cried out, calling on Sylviana Melcarini not to close the door too hastily. Afterwards, Sylvie found Christopher's younger brother, Prince Edgar, standing on the doorstep and, confused, demanded that the door be opened again, not understanding why he had come. The girl then opened the door for the young man, who explained that he had come to apologize, but she calmly reminded him that if this was an apology from the royal family, then compensation had long since been settled. Meanwhile, Gilbert sincerely admitted that he was wrong about his behavior the previous day and said that it was unacceptable to mistreat a woman who had been rejected, and she wondered if he had really come solely for those words. Gilbert then sternly pointed out that her disdain for the royal family was a separate issue, but she calmly questioned whether that was really the case, watching him without a hint of embarrassment. Gilbert sternly inquired about the precise plans being hatched there, recalling how someone had sincerely apologized but then become enraged by his rudeness. The woman quietly admitted that perhaps she had gotten too carried away with the villainous image yesterday. He then confidently stated that this territory was under his control and he could not leave a potentially dangerous person unsupervised, which caused her to simply blink in confusion, not understanding what he was getting at. After this, Roald was stunned to realize they were in Prince Edgar's domain, despite being certain of the opposite. Gilbert calmly explained that he wasn't lying, and the secluded province was ideal for life after breaking with the crown. Meanwhile, Letitia marveled at the rare coincidence. Meanwhile, Roald pointed at the map, accusing his opponent of trying to hide in the enclave, believing he wouldn't be found there. Letitia realized she'd missed an important detail. Roald then demanded to know if she was plotting to overthrow the government. Then the girl sharply responded that it was she who became the victim both of the broken engagement and of the assassination attempt, and the young man, defending himself, asked them to stop portraying him as the villain. After this, Roald bowed and apologized, acknowledging his injustice. Letitia noted to herself that, despite his background, he knew how to bow his head and remained remarkably forthright. She felt a slight uneasiness, but remembered that she had dreamed only of a quiet life, cultivating the land, cooking from her own harvest, and not getting involved in any intrigues. Gilbert, however, seemed impenetrable, and next to him, Florin noticed that he looked as if he still didn't believe a single word she was saying. The girl was about to explain herself. Then she insistently demanded that he leave. She accepted the apology, she was only interested in the monthly compensation, and that was all. However, he tried to hold her back, but she sighed wearily and teleported away. The next day, Gilbert showed up at the house again, surprising Letitia. He thanked her for forcing him to the palace and doubted her farming plans. She just let out a heavy sigh, announcing that she was starting the farm today, inviting anyone who wanted to just watch. Then the two stood in front of a huge field. One insisted that such a large area couldn't be developed alone, while the other joyfully tried to decide what to plant. Then the girl enthusiastically listed dozens of vegetables and fruits, stunning the young man. She explained that they had potatoes and sprouts from the underground. He asked what that meant, and she decided to start with the underground sprouts. Meanwhile, the narrative explained that such sprouts grow quickly on the surface, yielding a rich harvest, but only for one season, and therefore new ones must be stocked up through regular trips into the dungeons. The girl cheerfully called out to Aqua, and the young man expressed indignation at the idea of such a strange system. The third participant replied that it was convenient for beginners, and the man at the well remarked that water was needed first. Then Sylvie summoned the water spirit Aqua, and a surprised Gilbert immediately recognized her. Melva asked the spirit to help purify the water in the well, and Sylvie readily agreed. With her next gesture she summoned Terra, the spirit of the earth, who appeared with his arms crossed and asked why he had been called. Roald was astonished to see the earth spirit and asked him to improve the soil for the coming harvest. Another man nearby couldn't understand how she could have made a pact with two spirits at once. Gilbert then explained that the general pact with the elements was not particularly complex, but that a magician was usually only able to contact the spirit of his own power, and that water and earth were higher spirits, making her situation exceptional. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, while Melva summoned the windy spirit Ventus, while Gilbert summoned the fire spirit Ignis, preparing for further work. The girl confidently declared that she had made a pact with all four great spirits for convenience, and one of them gallantly offered to carry out any task. She then asked for the sacks of seed potatoes to be carried, leaving the stunned man to ask what she even meant by convenience. Then the other man realized with shock that the person standing before him was Silverini, an S-rank adventurer who had tamed all the great spirits and was using them for farming, which was far beyond his wildest imagination. Rold cautiously inquired whether the royal family was asking for favors, and she admitted she had long been busy fulfilling their orders as an adventurer. Afterward, she shared her plan for a quiet life, intending to focus her magic on herself rather than on grueling missions. She went on to explain that the former king himself had ordered her to go underground, issued her an adventurer's license, and asked her to obtain useful underground vegetables for the elderly deceased monarchs, which left her interlocutor genuinely stunned. The girl added that, despite the hardships of her own path, the payment was fair, and she viewed it as a mutually beneficial exchange. Meanwhile, she secretly juggled her studies, adventures, and noble duties, all for the sake of the royal family, remaining their secret enforcer. The man then admitted that everything had changed after his broken engagement. His parents had insisted that he not return, and he had decided to retire as an adventurer and live alone in the wilderness. Then the girl, with wet eyes, thought about the loss of her family and her fiancé, wondering whether she finally had the right to want to live for herself, having found herself in the rural province. At that moment, Gilbert realized that she simply had nowhere to return to, which meant that the royal family had effectively destroyed her former life. Melva imagined her parents gently suggesting they take a vacation in the countryside, then acknowledged that it all depended on how one interpreted the situation, and it was unlikely they would have rejected her. She then asked Gilbert if he was happy with his stated desire to live a quiet life. Narrator mentioned that Edgar was a handsome and popular character in the game, but he wasn't a beloved hero or a significant figure, and the girl wondered why he was so persistent. Then she remarked that Silviana's role as the villain was over, and Silverini's new life was just beginning. Afterward, she cheerfully urged him to return to his gardening chores, standing in a sunny field surrounded by little spirits. The next day, Gilbert confronted a distraught girl at the door. He insisted he wouldn't fall for her tricks, but she quickly denied any intentions and asked him to leave because he was in the way. Rold then explained that, as both the ruler of the land and a member of the royal family, he was obliged to keep an eye on such a dangerous person. The girl looked at him with irritation and surprise. After this, Rold announced that he would come regularly until he was convinced of her innocence, and Letitia was shocked by such persistence, while Melva muttered irritably about how tiresome it was. The girl sharply reiterated how fed up she was with all this, and the man, as luck would have it, revealed his past S-rank status. The woman pushed him away and told him to go home immediately, as her opinion remained unchanged. Gilbert then asked Silviana about her plans for the day, and she stretched happily and remarked that the weather was perfect for a truly lazy day. Later, the girl told Prince Edgar that she had come to look after him, explaining that after moving, she needed to stop by the Adventurers Guild and head to the center of Erdia. Gilbert admitted he'd wanted to leave earlier, but someone blocked his path every day. Letitia reminded him that she was a young noblewoman living alone and had the right to manage her own affairs. Then he suggested using the teleporter, like last time, but she refused, saying that she did not want to look rude or drive away a representative of the royal family, and that establishing a circle was a troublesome matter. Afterwards, the girl explained that teleportation circles allow instantaneous travel, but require a significant expenditure of magic. Therefore, the man preferred to walk to Erdia rather than waste energy on the journey. Under the blossoming cherry trees, the girl remarked on the arrival of spring and confessed that she wanted to leisurely walk the path on her own. He quietly agreed, finding the decision entirely logical. Afterwards, Rold asked if she was willing to take the 20-minute walk, and she confidently declared that she could handle the distance, even though she belonged to a noble family. He only reluctantly allowed her to do as she pleased. Meanwhile, the scene switched to a bustling border town, where one of the vendors loudly announced the readiness of fresh hot dogs. Letitia held the long-awaited hot dog with delight, savoring the soft bun and juicy filling, calling it a moment of perfect bliss. Gilbert looked at her, amazed by her genuine enjoyment. The girl then reminded her companion that they needed to greet the guild, but he asked the merchant for another helping, enjoying the taste so much that she remarked that when living a slow life, there was no need to rush. Gilbert then asked Sylvie if she had finished moving to the farm, and she happily announced that she had officially become part of the Erdia community, while Rold offered to help if needed. Afterwards, two local men asked Sylvie to help with their upcoming celebration, and a woman nearby asked her to accompany her child to the first dungeon. Sylvie agreed, adding that she couldn't refuse Hansan's request. The girl explained that she was known here only as the adventurer Sylvie Rini, and Gilbert wondered if she was hiding her noble status, since her popularity significantly exceeded his own. The woman recalled the adventurer ranking system and added that an S-ranker in a quiet rural town commands unwavering respect. She then admitted that she hadn't been craving a constant escort, earning the man's curious glance. At the Adventurers Guild, the older man greeted Sylvie warmly, but hesitated when he saw the person she'd brought. Inside, two employees were happily discussing their long-awaited return. Edgar raised his hand in a friendly greeting, and the dark-haired girl reacted with mild surprise. The man awkwardly apologized for not offering tea, confident the guildmaster would have already noticed the second prince's presence. The girl was puzzled by Prince Edgar's presence next to Sylvie, then explained that he was keeping tabs on her, suspecting her of hiding on her own lands after breaking ties with the crown. The young man listened, his gaze pensive. Rold admitted he was still a rookie despite his training at the academy. The older man recalled his fondness for a certain secluded spot, and the girl firmly declared that Rold should be viewed solely as a budding adventurer. She thought that if it was the Melcarini family, then this was perfectly logical. Another man recalled how shocked he was that the Duke's only daughter had become an adventurer, and yet another confirmed that she had been under the guildmaster's care for 3 years. The narrative clarified that the Melcarini family had always had a renowned martial heritage. The first of the line was a prince who escaped from the palace, became an adventurer, and then acquired the title of Duke, a rather unusual origin. The story then went on to mention Sylvie's parents. Both were distinguished adventurers. Her mother, a healer known as the Blood Saint, and her father, a man who fell in love at first sight and persistently courted her until she agreed to marry him. The girl reflected on how strange her family was, while the narrative described the nobles' magical training, their career paths, and the rarity of choosing the path of an adventurer, accompanied by scenes of student life and various professions. The older man explained that he was the one who carried out all the high-level assignments in the city. The young man admitted that he preferred a quiet life to dangerous forays, and the young woman noted with admiration that Sylvie had already retired from her adventurer career. The girl confidently declared that she had earned enough to start her own farm and that her long-awaited peaceful life had already begun. The man in the background listened to her words with attentive interest. The young man was amazed to realize that she had saved enough money in 3 years to maintain vast fields and a house. The girl explained that she had purchased a year's supply of expensive time crystals, the cost of which was comparable to the average family's monthly expenses. Edgar, sweat pouring down his temples, tried to imagine the amount of work required to earn such sums. The girl calmly explained that all this required enormous resources and careful balancing of studies until recently. Gilbert then suspected a hidden agenda, though Letitia, with a slight laugh, suggested checking out the bustling square. Rold tried to stop her, and the elderly man, hearing the commotion outside, thoughtfully inquired about what was going on. Afterwards, a crowd quickly gathered at the fountain, someone called for help, and a woman rushed to ask what had happened. Another desperately pleaded with Sylvie to save her son. The blonde girl excitedly explained that he had recently received his adventurer's license and had ventured into the dungeon alone, despite being told to bring an escort. The dark-haired companion tried to reassure her. Then the man had to report that the victim was surrounded by monsters and could not move, while the others casually reproached the lack of an experienced escort for the newcomer. The girl clarified that anyone who passes the exam can obtain a license, but real combat is very different from the training environment. The school prohibits taking the exam before graduation, considering it too dangerous, especially for beginners. After that, she volunteered to go to the rescue without hesitation and ordered an urgent request to be sent to the guild, and those around her excitedly reported that the newcomer had gone into the dungeon of the southern forest. Rold explained that Erdia had many dungeons suitable for beginners, but that's where the most powerful creatures were found. Eileen, in desperation, confessed that she didn't have resurrection magic and needed to hurry, eliciting a shocked reaction from Gilbert. Then Rold grabbed the girl's hand sharply, warning her that going like this was reckless, and asked if she really had come out unarmed. But she only concentrated harder, demonstrating her determination. Eileen confidently opened her fan and assured him that was quite sufficient. Roald, surprised, asked what she intended to do and admitted he hadn't intended to use teleportation. Lethea then activated a magic circle, emphasizing that every second counted. Roald instantly took up a position to protect her, and both firmly declared their intention to engage in combat immediately. The girl held her fan confidently, her back to the young man standing next to her, sword in hand. He decided to take advantage of the situation to test her adventurer skills and finally understand her true intentions. The young man immediately recognized the dungeon, and the girl insisted that they urgently reach the place and retrieve the stranded newcomers. After that, the two of them entered the dungeon's dark and ominous passage. The narrative further introduced a mystical entity, created by the goddess Idun as a test for humans, hiding deep within the ruins and magic-filled caves. Roald walked through the dungeon for the first time outside of training, noting that it was much easier to walk here than the damp and slippery dungeon he'd entered at age 10. Letitia was surprised by the comparison. She recalled being thrown off cliffs and swept into the sea during her rigorous training, and Roald asked what kind of person her mother was. He learned that she possessed unlimited resurrection magic. The girl explained that she was currently using her intimidation skill, which made weak monsters lose their will to fight. The young man was shocked, doubting such usefulness, but she confidently noted that the technique had been explained back at the academy. Letitia watched Roald closely, noting his focus and readiness to fight with his sword raised, while simultaneously wondering why Prince Edgar was so wary of her abilities and preferred to rely only on his own conclusions. Then Roald heard a scream and ordered them to go that way. Letitia looked around anxiously, and soon they saw a room strewn with wounded wolves, among which lay a crippled man, surrounded by rubble and blood. The wounded man found himself pinned against a wall by snarling wolves, while a girl knelt nearby, begging for help. At that moment, a woman nearby quietly ordered someone to remain still, shocking the man watching. The girl asked Edgar if he understood the monster's habits, and he tensely confirmed that they were driven by the instinct to devour humans. An image of snarling wolves flashed through her mind, emphasizing that for the creatures, humans were merely prey. Then, standing on a rock, Eileen ordered everyone to close their eyes for a few seconds, explaining that the predators could be distracted with something more enticing. After that, she concentrated and began casting a spell. Roald protested, thinking someone was going to fight alone, but the girl snapped her fingers and declared she wasn't alone. She then summoned Ventus and Ignis, who rushed forward, ready to reduce the enemy to ashes. Meanwhile, Gilbert demanded an end to the chaos and the completion of the operation without unnecessary fighting, while Roald declared that he would not surrender his men to anyone. Melva reproached him for his ineffectiveness, and Letitia tried to reason with the overly fussy spirits. Roald then charged forward with a fiery attack, with Eileen hovering nearby, watching in shock as the two pixelated wolves growled and charged in a furious attack. Gilbert asked if everyone was safe and reported that the newcomers were now safe. Roald, sitting on the ground with an injury, admitted that everyone was still alive. Gilbert then declared boldly that he would finish off the remaining creatures and urged everyone to act without restraint. Eileen confidently agreed, and at that moment, the enraged wolf rushed forward while no one hesitated. A girl with long dark hair swung her chainsaw at the massive wolf, tearing apart the stone floor beneath them as the beast let out a pained roar. The woman then gently declined the offer of assistance, surprising the three onlookers, and the fox-like creature crumbled into digital shards. She stood in the center, calmly balancing on the cracked ground. Roald, along with the other two, watched in awe as Letitia destroyed the monsters in the blink of an eye. He remembered that the creatures left behind magical stones after their death, and wondered why high-quality specimens were so prized on expeditions. The woman sternly ordered the group to assess their skills as adventurers and begin treating the wounded. She added that if they lacked strength, they would have to retrain. The girl confidently remarked that they should simply rely on her, and the three people around her were surprised. One of them finally realized that the person standing before him might be Sylvie Rini herself, an S-rank adventurer. Then she firmly declared that she was exactly who they thought she was. The man next to her acknowledged that there was no longer any doubt, and the small crowd murmured approvingly, with one person professing his sincere admiration for her. The grateful girl thanked Sylvie, while the angry man scolded the others for their lack of training. The calm woman assured the master that the lesson had been learned. Sylvie gently reminded them that they had almost become monster food and told them not to take any more risks. She then explained that she had promised Hansan to pay attention to the farm, but would accompany them after the second training session, albeit with some leniency. Afterwards, she admitted that taking on extra work was a bad habit, and he noted that she was surprisingly good at taking care of people. The girl loudly declared that this city now belonged to her by right, and the young man next to her wanted to say something, but stopped short, without finishing the sentence. Then Gilbert confessed that he wanted to protect what he considered important. Nearby, a girl cheerfully said she was hungry, and the young man listened, observing the scene in the bustling town square. Gilbert then explained that the prepared pancakes were the answer for that very hot dog, and the girl clarified why the pancakes were the choice. He admitted he couldn't afford to be indebted to someone he was watching, and Letitia decided not to hold back. She wondered if this was an excuse for him to eat. Gilbert, after tasting the dish, was surprised by its airy texture and delighted with its flavor. He admitted that her fight in the dungeon had looked truly impressive, and she thanked him, briefly thinking that with such strength she could overthrow an entire kingdom, but then discarded the thought as unnecessary. Gilbert then asked her if it had ever occurred to her to get rid of his brother for the pain he had caused her, but she sharply rejected this, explaining that despite her hostility, she was not acting so primitively. They sat at the table, and the girl apologized for her harsh words about the boy's relative, noting that he had also shown hostility, so the matter could be considered closed. He admitted that he had respected his brother until he began shirking his responsibilities. Afterwards, she reflected that causing harm simply out of dislike reduces anyone to the level of monsters, and she wasn't yet ready to give up being human. Meanwhile, her interlocutor watched her reasoning closely. Meanwhile, the young man declared that he would keep an eye on her longer because she was difficult to understand, and she noted that princes seemed to have too much free time and reproached him for treating him like an inexperienced adventurer. The young man then suggested calling her by his first name, Edgar, emphasizing that they were the same age and there was no need for formality. He also announced that he would call her Sylvie. Gilbert asked if she minded, and Melva admitted it was no problem. He then noticed that she'd already abandoned her formal style mid-conversation, and she responded with a calm smile. The girl explained that Edgar's name didn't sound particularly royal, which is why she forgot, and the young man reminded her that this didn't give her the right to behave too freely. At that moment, Edgar quickly ran up to Sylvie, noticing something was wrong, and she anxiously told him that the potato field had been completely destroyed. Roald asked if it looked like an accident, and Letitia irritably explained that all the tubers they had planted had been dug up by someone, and called the incident a huge loss. The girl angrily blamed the horned rabbits for the destruction of her garden beds, lamenting her failed plans to prepare baked potatoes, fried rashers, bacon, and gratin. The narrative explained that these animals are the worst enemy of any farmer. Then the fire spirit, on the orders of the master, went to look for the culprits, and the dark-haired woman gloomily promised to turn the rabbits into stew, which made the little companion perk up. The fiery entity declared that it would capture them alive and personally pass judgment on those who had desecrated the industrious corner, but the two girls brushed off the pathos and ordered Ventus to keep an eye on it. The young man wondered why the spirits had become so rowdy. After this, the girl asked Edgar to help if he was free, but he said the opposite, and she noted with irony that he was evading state affairs under the guise of supervision. Gilbert, visibly worried, asked what he should do, and the girl confidently said that she would count his help as compensation for ruining his brother's engagement. The girl asked Edgar to run a lightning bolt through a metal wire, and a young man nearby suggested using it as the basis for an electric fence against pests. Roald noticed that the wire was made of mithril, while Melva sternly pointed out that such a rare metal shouldn't be used for a farm fence. It repels creatures but attracts thieves. Florin, however, noted that mithril was already lying unused in a number of houses. Gilbert sternly warned her to be more careful living alone and recommended regular wire. She wondered if he'd ever considered dealing with thieves himself, and realized his control extended far beyond mere defense. Then she wondered if he was bothered by her life here while he was repairing the fence. Then she decided he was either too serious or too kind-hearted. Remembering her father's visit yesterday, she wondered if Edgar was spending too much time on her, and in the end, she wondered if she herself had overdone it. They discuss the ongoing chaos in the palace, mentioning that the ducal house was once again embroiled in affairs of state while Edgar was torn between field duties by day and endless paperwork by night. After this, Roald began to think that he was overexerting himself by coming here between jobs, and he couldn't help but remember his old desire to open a small country cafe with his sister. Meanwhile, the dark-haired girl was thinking about her own projects, from selling handmade accessories to selling local vegetables, while the blonde mentioned that her sister was in charge of the kitchen, and she was supposed to create desserts. The girl then recalled how she worked in an ordinary company, saving money, and at the same time attended evening courses in pastry making, realizing that the difficult pace completely deprived her of the strength to think about anything until she returned home. Roald then panicked as he saw the horned rabbits and Sylvie's spirits approaching them, while the others debated whether to burn them all or try to capture them alive. He only bitterly noted how in vain they had planted those seed tubers. Gilbert admitted he was far from S rank, but emphasized his rookie status, then tightened his grip on his sword as a small creature collapsed nearby. Edgar declared decisively that he would defend the field and challenged his opponents to battle, preparing to charge when several aggressive creatures rushed at him, while nearby a girl tried to understand the cause of the noise. Then Roald called out to Sylvie, astonished by the huge pile of fallen rabbits, and she wondered if Edgar had really managed to deal with them all alone. At that moment, Ignis was scolded for his naivety in trying to blame just one animal. Edgar looked confused when the girl praised his culinary skills with obvious delight, reminding him that it even turned out well, while he remembered his ill-considered promise to cook a stew. Florin then happily noted that there were more antlers than could be eaten and suggested using them for potions. She thanked Edgar, who confidently decided that the pests would definitely not come near their plot. Sylvie cheerfully suggested a break and put down a basket of food, and the young man hesitantly agreed, understanding the need for normal meals, having learned that the treat was prepared for the two of them as a tasting. Gilbert initially considered refusing, but eventually took the portion. The scene then shifted to a sunny garden, where he and the dark-haired girl were enjoying lunch, remarking on the taste of the dish, and she was delighted to have pleased him. The girl asked him why he wasn't working there, surprising him. She then warned him about the risk of overwork and insomnia, but he admitted he would continue monitoring despite her concerns. She then proposed Nandemo Hale, a magical storage unit with various designs that could hold any number of items, emphasizing its value and the need to handle it with care. She explained that carrying documents in such a bag made traveling easier, while the young man was concerned about the rarity of the item. In response, she readily offered to help around the farm, considering it part of her slow lifestyle. Gilbert laughed warmly, but then suddenly froze, and the short-haired girl asked what had him so wary, addressing him as Edgar and expressing slight bewilderment. According to the narrator, the older brother was struck by the charm curse, and the young man chuckled, stating that the other man was behaving much more unpredictably, and wondered if he was even capable of getting used to such a thing. Later, Gilbert sat alone on the bed in the dimly lit room, lost in heavy thoughts, while the dark-haired girl considered her brother naive for not noticing the bright presence of Sylvie Rini. She shaped the silver clay, added magical stones, applied designs and a little power, and then with genuine joy presented an elegant pair of earrings that made the wearer more attractive. The girl cheerfully described her plan to sell accessories as part of her slow life, mentioning Sylvie's popular pieces that sell out instantly, while someone nearby chuckled and noted the difficulties of an artisan whose goods are constantly disappearing from the shelves. She hopes that the jewelry will become a small talisman that will give any girl confidence, and that warm moments spent with loved ones will softly emerge in her memory. Afterwards, she reflects on her lack of interest in romance in both her past and present lives, admitting that she does have an underlying sensitivity, albeit one that is embarrassing. Meanwhile, Letitia wonders if Edgar will show up today, remembering that he was working here the day before. She notes that he used to argue with her often, but has recently become calmer, displaying a seriousness and sense of justice that greatly distinguishes him from his brother. She recalls their distant relationship, because once they were expected to be friends as relatives and childhood acquaintances, but they only really talked after his engagement broke off. The girl suddenly realizes how surprisingly easy it is to talk to him, and wonders if he's the first person she's ever had such a casual conversation with. At that moment, there's a knock, and she turns to the door. Then Sylvie comes in later than usual, and Edgar immediately notices her tardiness and apologizes, which surprises her, because it looks as if he was not waiting for her at all. Gilbert expresses concern, and the girl reveals that her brother has been put under a spell, causing the young man to become acutely wary. After this, the man informs his stunned interlocutor that traces of the curse have been found throughout the castle, and then explains that the caster who unknowingly enchanted those around her turned out to be Lady Katia, leaving the woman speechless. Gilbert admits that the report came in last night, which adds to the shock, as he only now realizes that his brother has also been a victim of the influence. He sinks onto the couch, annoyed that he went into the dungeon without permission and got caught in the curse, especially while he was engaged to a normal girl. The neighbor confirms that the spell has consumed both of them. The elderly man explains that during their investigation, Christopher and Lady Katia entered unexplored ruins for training, where an ancient demonic curse struck the girl, spreading its spell to everyone nearby. Christopher suffered the most, while Katia herself is undergoing purification in the temple. The group discusses that a spell has engulfed the entire palace, causing the royal family and servants to unconsciously desire the elimination of anyone who threatened Lady Katia, which now explains the general state of mind. Gilbert recalls his former ardor, and the grown woman remarks, her brother's hasty readiness to break off his engagement to Lady Sylvian was the result of outside influence. He sits in his chair, lost in dark thoughts, realizing that his obsession with banishing Sylvie was due to the curse, and wondering why he hadn't noticed his brother's lifeless gaze before. After this, Gilbert speaks words of encouragement to Edgar, noting his diligence and reliability and hoping that one day he will become a pillar of support in the defense of the country. The young man recalls how his brother was the first to recognize his skills in swordsmanship and magic control, helping him organize his training and encouraging others to develop their abilities. He then admits that he never connected what was happening with feelings, and regretfully thinks that he should have realized it earlier. The memory takes them back to his frequent visits to the academy to train Katia, despite her origin. Gilbert goes into a rage, blaming Silviana Melcarini for their misfortunes, insisting that they brought A-rank adventurers with them and acted prudently, while someone nearby tries to calm him down. He goes on to explain that when entering a dungeon, an adventurer must soberly assess his capabilities, and the girl confirms that this is exactly what she was taught. Then the tension reaches its limit when one of the young men grabs Edgar by the collar and sharply demands an explanation, and he, stunned, barely understands what is happening in front of him. An older man sternly told Christopher to stop disgracing himself, explaining that punishment would come later, while another reminded him to focus on cleansing himself. Gilbert then turned to Edgar, advising him to undergo the temple ritual in the morning, even if the remaining spells had little effect, and the young man quietly agreed after hearing his brother's confession. Meanwhile, Raoul explained in detail the nature of Katia's spell and its effect on Prince Christopher, and Letitia listened, barely concealing her shock. Afterwards, Gilbert sincerely apologized for the past, admitting that he had mistakenly considered Sylvie a rival due to the curse and that his brother had not attacked her of his own free will. The girl was surprised when the question was asked whether the influence had been completely removed, and she confidently confirmed that the temple had finally freed Edgar from the spell. Eileen agreed with this firmly, which amazed Gilbert, who remembered that even in the chaos on the farm, the young man had protected her, although their meeting at the palace then seemed incredibly strange. Gilbert then asked if surveillance was still necessary, and Roald laughed with relief, finally understanding the true reason for his previous doubts. After this, Gilbert assured the dark-haired girl that he would not find a more reliable ally than her, saying this with sincere confidence. He went on to declare that His Highness was obliged to take responsibility for his own actions and consider the future of the state, while Florin also acknowledged his own guilt for his previous blindness. Gilbert merely noted that his friend's concerns were unnecessary and mockingly recalled the prince's reckless fanaticism and his risky expedition into the dungeon. The girl recalled how she had once done everything she could, and he had remarked that decisions were sometimes difficult. Then the sight of two smiling children in her memory seemed to prompt her to think about supporting the country in the future. She reflected on her role as the villain and wondered whether the prince would be able to overcome royal prohibitions or give up his title for Katia, realizing that the dissolution of their union was inevitable. Roald cautiously noted that the atmosphere was becoming depressing, and Letitia mentally agreed. The tension of the meeting arose because of His Highness, whose weakness had long been in need of correction. Then the girl enthusiastically offered to cook some juicy burgers, and her companion asked her in bewilderment why. She then declared that lunch today would be greasy and unhealthy, and demanded his help, to which he meekly agreed. Gilbert emphasized that he never wanted to interfere with His Highness's romantic life and never forced anyone to love against their will, and Sylvie acknowledged their mutual dislike. A woman nearby asked if she had ever considered charming her brother, noting the power of such a spell. The girl insisted she preferred to win his affection through her own efforts, spiced only with her own cooking, and the man ordered him to stop making strange comments and get back to cooking. Someone nearby expressed surprise at her expression, and she calmly described it as girlish. At this time, an elderly man praised Lord Dryden for the successful sale of counterfeit jewelry with magical stones, offering to continue for the sake of profit, and someone behind bars sighed loudly in horror. The girl happily said that she could finally deliver the jewelry, walking next to the young man, who asked if this was the amulet he had been working on earlier, the one with the blessing effect. A friendly voice greeted Sylvie, noting her rare versatility and hinting at the high demand for the items she worked with. Rold quickly announced that she had arrived just in time, attracting the attention of the shopkeeper and the owner of the cafe nearby, and Melva asked Sylvie to look at something, causing the girl to be surprised. Rold asked if the earrings were really made by Sylvie, and Gilbert explained that he had bought them at the new shop on Gruner Street, while Letitia watched them with keen interest. The girl carefully examined the jewelry and immediately criticized the work. The silver appeared cheap, the lines were uneven, and she confidently noted that she would never have created such a hack job. Afterwards, Raoul reported that the earrings were sold as magical amulets, and buyers thought they belonged to Sylvie, to which she remarked that real earrings attract much more attention, while fakes hardly evoke a reaction. Meanwhile, Gilbert demanded to know how exactly the pieces were similar, but Melva emphasized the almost perfect similarity of the shapes. Florin added that she had come precisely to check whether they were fakes, as the pattern clearly copied her technique. Then Rold flared up, declaring that he invested every piece with a carefully crafted incantation and would not allow his creations to be equated with cheap trinkets. Letitia admitted she bought the earrings because of the low price, but Gilbert pointed out the high price tag, doubting their authenticity. The girl calmly explained that the buyers weren't to blame, but the counterfeiter was dangerous. A weak spell or an inexperienced mage could cause a magical backlash. The audience was visibly shaken. Then someone clenched their fist, feeling the indignation growing, because releasing such fakes was both risky and unforgivable. Rold turned to Sylvie, who, also clutching his hand, clearly felt the insult from those who deceived people and put them at risk. Rold tried to reassure her, but heard her confident reply that she was perfectly calm. After a moment, Sylvie softened slightly, and Edgar watched her anxiously. She assured him she was fine, thanking him for his concern. Nearby, two girls decided to throw away the questionable earrings, calling them hideous. After this, she reminded him that she had come to deliver a new batch of jewelry and admitted that she was afraid to disturb him, but the manager assured her that the demand was huge and there would be no problems. The man praised the quality of the new pieces and promised to take full responsibility for their implementation, and two delighted customers immediately expressed their desire to take the entire updated collection. The woman thanked them discreetly and warmly. A little later, Rold and the girl were walking down the street, discussing how often counterfeit charm earrings appeared. She admitted that, as the creator, she felt a twinge of irritation, even briefly reminding herself of the final boss. Gilbert then categorically declared that he couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening, as it affected everyone, and his tensed fist expressed his determination. He also mentioned that a weak spell could detonate in the dungeon, wiping out the entire group, and therefore asked Edgar for help. The determined girl confidently remarked that they would find and stop the culprits, as the lives of those who trusted her depended on their actions. The young man next to her nodded nervously and suggested they head to the guild. At the guild, an elderly master asked if it was related to the amulet, and Sylvie confirmed. The buyer had already contacted him for advice, and the Adventurers Association had begun its own investigation. The master then examined the documents and warned that the enemy was dangerous. The girl and her companion discussed a plan to capture the culprit, confirming the seriousness of their intentions. When Gilbert asked about the Dryden Trading Company, she confidently replied that they were almost certainly involved. The young man recalled that the firm dealt in wholesale supplies, to which she superficially agreed. The older man explained in detail, Dryden Matheson is the underground leader of Erdi, running many dubious businesses and behind most of the local scams and robberies. Gilbert noted that if they go after minor accomplices, they'll only catch the low-level perpetrators. The master added that in any city, there's always a figure who controls the criminal underworld. They discussed Dryden's role as a counterfeiter selling goods to uninformed merchants. One compared him to the Yakuza, while another concluded that they needed to get to the source, otherwise there was no point. Sylvie firmly declared that she would submit an official request to the guild to investigate the master forger, as the injured party was obligated to act according to the rules. The others were surprised by her intention to act independently, but she was not about to back down. Gilbert firmly stated that it was impossible to barge in and swing fists, while the dark-haired girl warned against joking with such ideas, and the fair-haired companion reminded that there was no direct evidence of a connection with Dryden yet. After this, Eileen confidently promised to lead the forger straight to Dryden if they accepted the official order, and the two men watched her calm but unwavering determination, noting both her character and the profitability of the upcoming reward. Meanwhile, in a cozy cafe, the girl excitedly suggested they finally begin their meal, while the young man admired the lemon tart, which was only made in early summer. She happily admitted she'd long dreamed of trying this seasonal dessert. At a nearby table, a woman took an interest in an attractive young man, and the man next to her explained that he was just a novice adventurer. Two others remarked on the tranquility of the area, calling the choice of this village a convenient ruse. The young man reported that Dryden was so skillful in his dealings that the royal power saw no formal reason to interfere, as he always remained within the law, skillfully avoiding responsibility. Afterwards, Rold admitted that selling the counterfeits had been a serious mistake, and Letizia agreed they had gotten involved with the wrong people. Both expressed confidence that Edgar would be able to handle the matter from the royal family's perspective. The girl noticed that his anger at the counterfeiters was much stronger than she expected, which surprised her. The young man, however, said her presence had kept him from becoming overly tense, and she wondered if she would lose control again. Then Gilbert, with a confident smile, promised he'd stop her before anything bad happened, though he honestly admitted that if she really lost her temper, he might not be able to handle it. She quietly acknowledged that such a thing was indeed possible. Letitia soon declared decisively that she had turned a blind eye to Dryden long enough, and now it was time to make him regret his actions. Behind her, Gilbert listened silently, watching intently. Later, a man with his hair tied back carefully opened the door, asking if this was Jylan's workshop, and immediately demanded to know the names of the visitors. The girl cheerfully announced that they were a team of adventurers forming a party, while a nervous young man stood nearby. They explained that they had come on a recommendation and wanted to order an amulet from Gilbert, much to his surprise. The workshop owner invited the guests inside with a warm smile, assuring them that he would do any job for a fair price, and offered to discuss the details right away. Gilbert and Letitia examined a photograph of Jylan, a master craftsman of magical instruments, and confirmed that he was the one creating the forgeries. The man next to her remarked on her speed and precision, worthy of a true master. The elderly observer then explained that the craftsman had been working for a long time, but had only recently begun to live in luxury, and the other man added that he had been followed and seen leaving Dryden's estate. Later, Gilbert discussed with Letitia that with the help of the forger it would be possible to get to Dryden himself, emphasizing that this was the first task of the novice adventurer, and therefore he was counting on Edgar. The woman specified that she wanted a specific amulet, and the man asked which one. Others mentioned counterfeit goods hidden in the workshop, and yet another mentioned that the amulet had to be of the type approved by S-rank adventurers. She referred to the magical amulets from Gruner Street and asked for a similar one to be made, but the craftsman asked, puzzled, what the heck was going on. Rold then became serious, and the man with slicked back hair nervously assumed he had misunderstood, and hastened to clarify that he had never claimed that amulets were actually approved by S-rank adventurers. Gilbert cut him off, declaring there was no point in making excuses. The ponytailed man excitedly noted that they'd already checked everything, and the blonde directly accused him of counterfeiting. At that moment, one of the men rudely ordered the suspect to step aside, a second took a position behind him, and a third announced that he had a warrant for him to proceed to the guild. The seated man reacted irritably, but was no longer able to resist. Letitia calmly intercepted the blow from the man with the knot on the back of his head, and he lost his footing and flew back, while Rold watched tensely nearby. After this, Edgar, with a sharp movement, pinned the resisting man to the floor. He screamed in pain, demanding to be released, and a woman nearby praised Edgar's dexterity, although he hesitated for a moment and then continued. Meanwhile, Gilbert was irritably questioning the two people messing around on the floor about why they were making a mess, but the girl confidently noted that she was wearing her favorite dress today and that he himself had handed the situation over to her. She then proudly declared that they were adventurers, and one of them was truly outstanding in level, while the fair-haired youth calmly leaned on his cane, and Master Jilin looked very intense. The smiling woman said she was investigating the true mastermind behind the counterfeits, but the frightened man, drenched in sweat, refused to reveal the customer's name. Then the girl playfully offered the boy his freedom in exchange for honesty, but he only became angry and rejected the offer. At that moment, another young man intervened, and she warned Edgar to step back because she was going to force the captive to talk. Melva then used her fearsome ability, directing it at one person so powerfully that he could barely stand it, and Gilbert instantly recognized the same technique she had used in the dungeon, but in a much more powerful form. The frightened prisoner asked her in a trembling voice who she was, and immediately realized that she was probably an S-rank adventurer. The girl confidently said that if he wished to speak, now would be the best time. Then the dark-haired man was surprised to hear Dryden's name, and the silver-haired interlocutor explained that she had agreed to work for money and would not have been able to survive in the city if she had refused such an order. The girl and the boy directly stated that monsters were being traded under Dryden's mansion, revealing a very important detail, and both spoke with the utmost seriousness. Afterwards, Roald and Letitia began discussing Dryden's plans. Letitia was shocked by the illegal sale of monsters, and Roald suggested that it might involve underground creature fighting, though he wasn't sure. Gilbert clarified that monster attacks in the city often stem from the Wreath Underground, and the girl asked if it resembled a show. The young man replied that it was just one possibility, and far from the most harmless. Narrator explained that monsters are sometimes released accidentally or deliberately to create chaos and cover up crimes, which is considered a serious violation of the Monster Control Act. The bound man, turning pale, admitted that such deals were more expensive than his counterfeit scheme. The girl admitted that she spent almost all her time in the dungeons and did not know about the shadow market, and Edgar, as a representative of the royal family, was accustomed to such information, which everyone readily acknowledged. Gilbert wondered if the Academy's late-night requests were related, and the girl mentioned keeping a teleporter in a closet, which left him astonished by her secret forays. The bound prisoner demanded his release, insisting he had told him everything, but Gilbert reminded him that normal people sleep at night, and therefore no information about such matters exists. The girl decided to convey the rest to Edgar, and he, without hesitation, grabbed the prisoner and kicked him, despite the man's protests, insisting that they had agreed otherwise. Gilbert coldly remarked that he had never promised to free him, while Letitia cheerfully declared that, on the contrary, she had. The prisoner glanced between them in fear. Meanwhile, Sylvie emphasized that proof of forgery was needed to bring charges. The others began hurriedly rummaging through the workshop, insisting they weren't lying, even though the prisoner furiously accused them of lying. The girl carefully examined the built-in safe and was convinced the traces must be there, but refused to hand over the key. A heated argument erupted between the participants, and one warned the other that if the safe was broken into, the guild would immediately find out. She then examined the magical mechanism, noting that it only opened with the correct key sequence and responded only to the registered owner. The girl admired the workmanship, assuring him that the lock was most likely crafted by the eccentric master craftsman Leonard. The man explained that obtaining the required item had been difficult due to fraud with magical instruments, and warned that the guild would add further charges to the case, while the woman nervously clicked the lock. The mechanism clicked, revealing a niche with jars and books, and her surprised companion admitted that her skill at picking locks, inherited from her mother, was indispensable when exploring ancient ruins, even if it seemed ridiculous. Letitia then produced Dryden's records and a box of counterfeit amulets, to which Eileen indignantly criticized the sloppy execution. The man next to her assured Gilbert that he would not allow more counterfeits. Roald warned that the monster trade was a threat to the state, and Letitia agreed, emphasizing the urgency of stopping Dryden while the other pointed to the cages containing the monsters. Soon they stood in front of Dryden's mansion. One remarked on its size, the other clarified that the house belonged to a notorious trading company in the Poshildi quarter. Gilbert asked Sylvie about the plan, and she explained that beneath the outer facade there were creatures that could do whatever they pleased. The man stated that Jilin had already been handed over to the guild. Dryden had given orders for the counterfeits, and the next step would be to check him himself, as well as expose the monster trafficking scheme and arrest its organizer. Gilbert doubted the simplicity of the task, But the girl confidently declared that this was exactly how it should be. He insisted on the need for solid evidence, since the estate only looked suspicious, and it was not a fact that monsters were still there. The girl ordered him to enhance his magical vision and re-examine the property. From an ordinary house, the mansion had transformed into a fortification with a double barrier imbued with lightning. Gilbert realized that no horned rabbit could survive there, and she concluded that the owners were hiding something behind the wards that prohibited entry and exit. She emphasized that after Jyland's arrest, Dryden would strengthen security, and now was the best time to strike, while Gilbert restrained her from haste, to which she strongly objected. After thinking it over, Gilbert admitted that the plan was risky and suggested carrying out an assault under the pretext of a search, but the girl stated that she was acting alone, and he should return to the capital for documents and people. Roald warned that acting alone was not the same as descending into the dungeon, and he was afraid of another outburst of rage, so he asked Letitia to wait for him while he teleported to the capital, promising to return in 20 minutes, and she agreed. Sitting down on the bench, she considered, if the game was accurate, then this was the right place. At that moment, the story reminded her that her Melcarini house had once extorted money from dishonest merchants, and she again appreciated the scale of the mansion. The girl mused that as the daughter of a duke and an S-rank adventurer, she had power, but she had to remember her role as a villain, feeling relieved that Edgar had managed to stop her last time. The memory showed a man and a woman assuring Sylviana that her strength was the result of the arduous training she had chosen, giving her abilities unavailable to others, but asking her to use them correctly. She seriously agreed with her parents, realizing that her real father and mother would not have allowed her to become a villain or the final boss, while the note pointed to the game developers who were turning Sylviana into a comedic figure. Then Roald squinted, trying to make out what he assumed to be a cargo van in the distance, but the distance made it difficult. Meanwhile, a girl with long dark hair was dragging a heavy stack of boxes. The girl noticed that the cart was openly transporting monsters, and a man stood nearby indifferently, and she noted out loud that they were being imported surprisingly brazenly. Roald saw the guards at the loading area and decided the moment was opportune. He apologized to Edgar, intending to wrap his arms and legs in lightning protective magic and then cast sound suppression. After this, Roald wondered if the mage responsible for disguising the newly brought monsters was lurking nearby, while Letitia watched the proceedings with wary attention. Letitia discovered the hidden panel and reasoned that if the door was hidden by magic, then there was definitely more to the wine cellar inside. Then the girl unlocked the secret mechanism, opening a passage with a staircase leading underground, and carefully descended down, feeling the thick aura of monsters around her. The story then went on to explain that the monsters were creatures of the dungeons, and the stronger they were, the less often they left the depths on their own, although twisted collectors often captured them and attempted to subdue them by force. Meanwhile, Eileen approached another door, thinking that if the enemy was keeping them locked underground, then perhaps they weren't too dangerous, but she couldn't relax. After counting the seconds, she swung the door open. Behind her was a room filled with cages containing monsters, and the girl realized what chaos would arise if even one escaped, when a threatening growl came from the depths. Then they noticed a baby dragon in chains in the far corner, and the story reminded them that dragons are intelligent creatures, respected precisely because they rarely attack first. The girl lingered her gaze on the little dragon, reflecting on how much they trusted humans and how cruelly they were holding him here. Then she promised him that she would finish off the invaders and asked him to be patient for a little while. She warned that any rash action would provoke the rage of all the monsters, and ordered Ventus to lull them with the scent of the wind. The spirit replied that he understood everything, mistress. However, she was noticed by two guards who approached too quickly, and the girl sharply ordered Ignis not to use fire, although he stubbornly insisted that he was obliged to help her. One of the women demanded to know the name of the offender and asked if she was looking for a fight, while the men watched in horror as all the monsters lay unconscious. The confident girl grinned and declared that it was the opponent who had chosen the fight, and she had come to crush him, adding that a low-level henchman wouldn't have understood anything anyway. After this, 3 armed men received orders to seize the dark-haired offender, assuring her that she would not be able to resist such a number. The woman sighed, lamenting that her plans were being ruined again, and playfully deflected the fiery arrows. The stunned soldiers decided to attack with their blades. The determined girl parried the blow of the young man, who was trembling with tension, and then with a deft movement knocked the sword away, sending the enemy to the floor with a surprised cry. She stood firm as 2 men with guns tried to surround her, one declaring that she had been captured, and she coolly remarked that without the fan they had no chance. The girl asked sarcastically if their eyes were decorative, and the two began to discuss how beautiful she was and suggested asking Lord Dryden what to do with her, causing confusion in the man next to her. Letitia snapped that it was shameful to whip a lady's hand, after which the attacker flew back, and a new silhouette appeared in the doorway, and a small horned creature joyfully shouted his name. The elderly owner of the estate mockingly accused the intruder of insolence for entering his territory, but she calmly noted that she heard such accusations too often. At this point, Gilbert arrived with a document and apologized to Sylvie for the delay, announcing that he had received a search warrant for Dryden and that he had guards accompanying him. Roald realized the girl was gone and felt a sense of unease. The guards were discussing the adventurer accompanying Prince Edgar, and one of the men shouted that he had warned her to wait for reinforcements. Gilbert, tense and sweating, tried to warn Sylvie not to take any reckless steps, and then wondered if she had entered the huge building alone, which increased his anxiety. The narrative then showed the facade of a massive building, after which the interlocutors discussed that Dryden's trading company specializes in jewelry and women's accessories, although the second participant noted that they clearly did not come to buy. After this, the determined young woman asked the elderly owner why exactly he was there, and he, smiling slyly, addressed her as a young lady. The girl claimed to be an adventurer and was investigating the story of the accessories, to which the older man asked in surprise whether she really was an adventurer. The woman accused the old man of selling counterfeit S-rank adventurer-approved amulets, but he quickly denied the accusations, insisting that their company only offered ordinary goods. The man noted that even if the craftsman had made a fake out of ignorance, he would not be tried as a criminal, and asked how he expected to get out of the situation. The girl then asked how he was going to explain the cages with monsters and dragons, reminding him that this was not part of the standard product. The elderly merchant took a hidden object from under his cloak and said that the counterfeits were only a smokescreen, and that the real profit was hidden deeper, while the girl stood behind a lattice partition and watched from above. Lord Dryden ordered the little adventurer dealt with a hail of knives, and the crowd confidently cheered him on, believing that she would not withstand such an attack. Meanwhile, Sylvie Rini introduced herself as an S-rank hunter, standing in the dim corridor between the cages, her shadow casting a long shadow ahead. A worried man nearby was suggesting Dryden retreat, while another wondered if she understood the effort it had taken to obtain the dragonet. The old man quickly apologized, admitting that he hadn't recognized the high-level adventurer before him, and assured them that they meant no harm, but the woman abruptly put an end to any thought of a deal. The man offered ever higher percentages of sales, but she rejected the offer without hesitation, demanding that he immediately stop making counterfeits and stop considering her naive. Then the angry girl accused her opponent of risking the lives of adventurers for the sake of profit, calling on him to remember his conscience, after which she forcefully smashed the object on the floor. She soon threw several knives magically, threatening the terrified criminals who begged for their lives, and she declared that she would teach them a lesson in the proper use of magic, calling one of them a klutz. The calm woman with the fan emphasized that she was not interested in finishing off such an insignificant target, and at that very moment, dozens of blades pierced several men, causing them to cry out in pain and shock. The two found themselves pinned against the wall until the other warned them not to move, as the royal guards would soon arrive. Then the girl asked the little dragon with a smile if he was happy, and her friend admitted that she had gotten too carried away again. However, she immediately became worried that the guild might confiscate the find and resell it, and at that moment one of the remaining ones threw a knife, forcing her to sharply warn the others, shielding the baby. The girl called out loudly to Edgar, hugging the little dragon to herself, while the young man sat down next to her, shielding her with his body and demonstrating his readiness to act. After this, Edgar, who had arrived late, immediately checked to see if Sylvie was safe. She nonchalantly confirmed it and praised his perfect timing, and he admitted that he had known she would get into danger again and declared the Dryden Trading Company's violations. Gilbert solemnly announced that confirmation had been received of the illegal trade in monsters, and, with the authority of the royal family, announced the arrest of those involved, while the guards rushed inside, and the girl with the small creature watched the proceedings with unexpected surprise. The group reacted differently to the scale of the surprise raid. One member insisted that the evidence was overwhelming and the threat was obvious, while the girl apologized for being distracted by the younger dragon, confident that her protective magic would still keep him safe. Afterwards, Dryden was let out in shackles for illegally trading monsters, and guards rushed to inspect the mansion. Later, one of the men examined the documents, noting that Sylvie had been right, the case was indeed too big for the kingdom to ignore. Meanwhile, Gilbert was asked if he was handling the oldie case at such a late hour, and he replied that he had handed over the cleanup to the guild and therefore everything was under control now, while the others in the room were already resting. Then, while he was snacking, he thought about tomorrow's business meeting, which had previously been in the care of his older brother, and at the same time wondered how much progress had been made in lifting the curse from him. After this, the young man admitted that the spell no longer had any effect on him, but the accumulated fatigue was beginning to take its toll, and he wondered whether he should stop visiting Sylvie's farm, remembering that other nobles often worked until late at night. The girl assured her that even if a similar incident were to happen again, she would be able to cope without support, and the young man reminded her that he had initially come to watch over her, although this need had long since disappeared. Then she brought a fresh pie to the table, placing it in front of the young man who was sitting there, and he caught himself thinking that he was increasingly relying on her house and her care. Soon Gilbert fell back on the sofa, feeling the stifling weight of his palace duties, but a moment later he rose, determined to finish the remaining work despite his exhaustion. Florin noticed Edgar wandering down the corridor at a late hour and called out to him in a brotherly manner, clearly concerned about his condition. He then caustically reproached Gilbert, assuring him that he now hated him for the troubles and suffering he had caused others, but Gilbert hastily denied such conclusions. Gilbert then assured him that the curse in the dungeon was an accident and there was no one to blame, expressing hope for a speedy recovery, and the interlocutor admitted that they really should have been more careful in choosing a training location. After this, Rold voiced his concern. His brother's gaze remained clouded. Despite his daily cleansings at the temple, Gilbert mentioned Lady Katia's seclusion and asked if the royal amulet had protected Rold. The narrative explained that members of the royal family wear curse-proof amulets at all times, but the current variety of ancient charms has penetrated even this protection, and so court magicians are developing a new generation of amulets. Gilbert was considering whether to check on the progress of the research, but hesitated for fear of burdening Sylvie, and then the stern man informed him that, from Gilbert's point of view, an extremely harsh investigation would soon follow. Edgar walked silently down the corridor, and his companion remarked that, in a sense, he had even been lucky. Edgar himself reflected that he sincerely wished his brother's recovery, even though he had caused Sylvie a great deal of pain. Gilbert then decided to take on the job entirely, but he noted mentally that if a person is not willing to change himself, then no amount of reaching out to him will change the situation. A clear sky spread over the city, and the story noted that, despite fears of chaos after the closure of Dryden's company, Aldi's trade had only strengthened, as if people had thrown off the burden of bad rumors and previous pressures. The guild processed the captured monsters without incident, and released the dragon into the wild. Later, Gilbert asked Sylvie in surprise what she was doing, seeing her looming over the table with determination. The girl complained that she was looking for food suitable for the little creature, but none of the dishes pleased him, to which the young man asked in bewilderment why she was there at all, reminding her that the dragon should have been left to the guild. Back at the guild, she explained that the tiny creature would stay until its true home was found, and the elderly man, watching the baby play around the room, remarked admiringly how charming it was. The girl explained that for now she had to look after the little creature, and the young man standing nearby suggested that it saw her as a comrade, since it was she who had pulled it out of trouble. They then watched as the tiny dragon settled on the table, discussing how capturing it would have been incredibly difficult with a parent, after which, the girl lamented her complete failure in finding food, and the boy noted that feeding it had indeed proven to be a difficult task. Then she remembered with annoyance that she had never hit the kidnappers, and he explained that Dryden had deliberately left the dragon it hungry, considering weakened cubs easier to hold. After this, Letitia quickly opened the enchanted pantry in search of suitable food, from which a small creature immediately jumped out. Rold ordered her to stop, amazed both by her speed and by the bottomlessness of the magical vault. The girl was surprised to see the dragon greedily biting into the apple, because she was sure that dragons were exclusively predators, but the baby confidently devoured the fruit right down to the core. Then Rold held out a basket of fruit, but the creature rejected everything except the apples from the dungeons, and the man was amazed to realize that before him was a true gourmet, extremely picky about food. Gilbert smiled, noting how rare it was for Sylvie to be so flustered, and she asked irritably what he was so happy about. Soon the ponytailed girl suggested he not press her. She then admitted that obtaining underground apples was not easy, but at least now it was clear what was right for the baby, and the young man remarked that she could not blame her for that. The dragon stated that names had already been tried, and the girl asked if they were going to name him after all. Then she listed the options: Dracon, Drake, and Draco, and the young man chuckled, calling such decisions unusual. She added that one of the animals was particularly capricious. After this, Gilbert suggested turning to myths or old stories, but she noted that the baby was round and plump, to which he remarked that the creature itself was more likely waiting for a sonorous and impressive name. At that moment, the dragonling spoke up, suggesting the name Gyunion, and the boy recalled the ancient hero who had received the power of the goddess Adine to defeat the demon lord. The girl frowned, recalling something similar from the children's book Dungeon of Love. Gilbert laughed, deciding that since the baby liked it, the name would stick, and the girl responded by lightly scolding him for such whims. Then Melva reminded him that it was time to gather food for Gyunion, asked in which dungeon the suitable apples grew, and asked Edgar to keep an eye on one person for a minute. He agreed. The girl opened the door, wondering who it could be if not Edgar, but immediately heard her name. After that, the two guests announced their arrival in a cheerful and slightly playful tone. Sylvie was surprised by Teresa and Zill's visit, and the man with the baby in his arms asked why she was so confused. Teresa explained that they had come after inquiring at the guild, and Zill greeted Sylvie warmly. Letitia slapped Roald on the forehead, reminding him of his promise to write after the move was completed, and he guiltily admitted that he had been completely overwhelmed with work. Roald was surprised to see Prince Edgar in Sylvie's house, and Letitia laughed along with the other girl, mentioning that she thought he was living in a calm mode. Edgar confirmed that she knew of his situation. Zill introduced Teresa as his partner, after which she enthusiastically suggested going with Sylvie to the dungeon, causing equal amazement in Sylvie and the young man standing next to her. The young man explained that working with Sylvie allowed them to quickly rise to A rank, noting her outstanding level, and the girl added that they had gone through dungeons together many times and graduated from St. Aidan Academy. The girl admired something in her hands, and the dark-haired man was at a loss for an explanation. Then another young man showed them a miniature dragon and asked why Prince Edgar was there. Florin offered a restrained apology for his brother's actions towards Sylvie, and Eileen calmly noted that she had already told the others everything about the ducal lineage and the broken engagement. Afterwards, Roald also tried to apologize, but Gilbert declared it unnecessary. Letitia merely noticed that Roald was frowning again, at which point the small creature inquired about the dungeon, and Roald admitted that he wanted to be perceived as an ordinary adventurer. Meanwhile, two explorers stood at the entrance to dark ruins described as ancient caves filled with magic and monsters, while a third participant excitedly reported the appearance of a new dungeon nearby. Upon hearing this news, the man excitedly recounted his rare find, and the girl suggested inviting Sylvie on another expedition. The other two then began talking about uncharted areas and how it would be a good idea to check out the apples from that area. The group then discussed the origin of the dungeon. One member wondered if it was a ruin transformed by magic, but another explained that it was formerly a natural cave under the guild's protection, and a third concluded that the place was under strong control. Afterwards, Gilbert asked if he could join in, explaining that he wanted to see how the dungeons were being surveyed and that he rarely got to work with such powerful companions, which surprised Letitia quite a bit. Florin asked if there were any curses lurking here, since it was not technically a dungeon, and Gilbert agreed, although he noted that there was still a risk, reminding them of the king's mandatory permission. The man, with a cheerful smile, asked if Edgar could handle it on his own, and the woman warmly greeted the prince, and another participant said she was glad to have the opportunity to collaborate. Then everyone enthusiastically supported the idea of reconnaissance, and one of them asked Gyunion to stay at home and guard the dwelling. Another suggested using the house as a base and praised Sylvie for her hospitality. Letitia warned them not to touch the spare provisions and reminded them that they could take apples from the table for lunch, while Gilbert assured them that this was the first day and they would return before evening. The little creature approved of such caution. She was still worried and considered creating a guardian golem, which surprised her companion, who knew it would be her first full-fledged attempt. Then the scene changed to a moment where the magical stones lay on three neat mounds of earth. After this, the girl gave instructions to the three created golems and the small dragon to guard the house without causing death, and the young man noted that they looked funny, although the creation of three structures at once was impressive for a first attempt. The girl cheerfully said goodbye to Gyunion, and the other called Sylvie, informing her that the guild carriage had already arrived, ready to deliver the squad to the research site. During the trip, one of the participants offered everyone a luring amulet, designed to look like a genuine certified S-rank item, while another jokingly said that he would sell it for a friendly price. Gilbert expressed concern that the newcomers might become a burden to the experienced ones, but Rold noted that one newcomer did stand out, and someone else noted the lack of tension among the group as a whole. One man inquired whether new faces had arrived from another city, while another reassured Edgar, telling him to ignore the rumors about a new dungeon. The prince, embarrassed, asked that his name not be mentioned, and the woman apologized for the fuss. The girl explained that the man was a scientist studying the formation of dungeons, and at the same time an experienced adventurer of St. Aidan, and the two companions exchanged surprised glances. The dark-haired participant then thanked everyone for their concern and emphasized the need for caution as the group settled inside the carriage. One of the men addressed the scientist as professor and suggested following his instructions. When they reached the small entrance to the dungeon, two men remarked on its diminutive size and the need to register before entering. The third quietly knocked on the stone and was immediately asked why he was doing so. The squad soon discovered a teleportation circle, and the girl explained that traveling with Sylvie was always safer. The return journey was easier with her, which everyone unanimously called the main advantage of their current expedition. The squad entered a damp, humid dungeon. One member noted the heavy air with displeasure, while another, in a more cheerful mood, suggested increasing the lighting to at least partially offset the gloomy environment. Afterwards, Sylvie explained that using spirit for reconnaissance was faster than any magic, so she asked Tara to survey the path ahead, and the others agreed, preparing to split up to more effectively avoid danger. Meanwhile, Gilbert noticed the cave widening ahead and suggested quickly drawing up a map. Melva and her partner studied the adventurer's detailed blueprint, noting its value and the potential for a profitable sale of a copy to the guild. The group then stopped at a fork. One participant reported that the tunnel split further, another noted an increased number of adventurers on the left side, and the man confidently chose the right route for a more peaceful progress. After this, the girl advised Edgar to always think through an escape route in case of meeting a strong opponent, and he, having pulled himself together, took her words seriously, increasing his own attentiveness. A few minutes later, they spotted a group of goblins in the distance. A heavily armed fighter rushed forward enthusiastically, and his companion beside him noted that they had arrived just in time for a quick fight.